Okay, what's up guys? So this video is about the reflective learning essay, assessment 2B for Researcher Development 1. What I'm going to do is go through the worksheet with you just a little bit. We're going to look at the issue around when it's due, talk about the essay question itself. I'm just going to unpack a few concepts for you to think about how you can begin to build this essay, and talk to you a little bit about how to incorporate content from the unit itself, as well as anything else that you've been doing this semester as well, and start thinking about a little example just from my own kind of thinking and learning this semester as well. So the reflective learning essay. The first thing for me to point out here is that this is an essay that's always been in Researcher Development 1, or what used to be called Research Design 1. And when I first started in the MRes, one of the first things that I knew was really good was this essay, because I'd just come from a lab where basically everyone in the lab had to write what are called personal statements in the United States. They're kind of short form essays that are about you as a researcher, what you've learned recently, how you've developed, and how you want to apply that learning to go on to do things in the future, in either the job that you're applying for or the graduate student position that you're applying for, or whatever. It's really common to have to write things like personal statements in a research career. So when I saw that the MRes had this assessment right up front in the first core unit, I was really pleased, because it really is something that you have to do quite frequently through a career. I would say it's not just limited to the world of research either. It's something that you have to do whenever you're applying for something like a job, where you have to explain to somebody, like, what do you know? What distinguishes you? How do you approach problems? Stuff like that. So let's get into the details. This is a 1,500-word essay, plus the appendix. We'll get into the appendix a little bit later, but I'll leave you essentially to read this worksheet, which is now up on Views. It's worth 20% of your final mark for Researcher Development 1. And it's due from, rather than due at, due from Friday the 22nd of May. Now we say due from there because what we'd like you to do is basically submit it when you're ready, anytime from the 22nd of May. So if your circumstances at the moment prevent you from apportioning time to this task, and this is one of your tasks that you have to do for this unit, but if your circumstances are such that you feel like you can't do this at the moment and you just need to concentrate on your project development report, that's fine with us. We'd encourage you to do the work in the sequence that we suggest, so doing this one in parallel to your project development report, but we leave that up to you. Like you ought to have the agency here to determine the sequence in which you do the work, and figure out what's best for you, and go with that and go hard at it. So that's week 12, due from the 22nd of May. Now the end date of that window, we haven't signalled in the worksheet because we want to kind of leave it open, but you can essentially think of it right out the end as the end of the semester, basically. If you need to submit something way into late June, that's fine with us. Just let us know. That's the main note. If you're submitting like a week after the 22nd or 2 weeks, you don't even need to let us know. Just do your work and get it in when it's ready. Now there's, as with the annotated bibliography assessment, there is a style guide down below. I'll get to that soon. But the first thing to do is think about, what is this essay that we're writing? What is this reflective learning essay? And essentially what it is a response to this essay question here on the page. And the question is, well, I guess it's a prompt, really. Well, it is a question, but it's mostly a provocation for you to start thinking. Looking back over the semester, what have you learned about research as a thing that humans do, including how knowledge claims are made, how research fields develop, and how various factors shape and constrain academic knowledge production? So as you can see, that's a gloss. That's a kind of gloss of Researcher Development 1. Research is the thing humans do, knowledge claims, how fields develop, and factors that shape and constrain academic knowledge production. That last one, factors that shape and constrain knowledge production, that's Foster et al. And the week 10 session that Jack and I will do live rather than recorded on Tuesday in week 10 about the academic publishing industry, which, as much as we might not like to think of it, plays a big role in shaping what kind of research gets published and what doesn't. So, looking back over the semester, you find yourself now at the end of the semester. Now is a time to pause for a moment and reflect, and you think about, well, what have I learned? What really stands out to me is the things that I've kind of found out, the discoveries that I've made, the insights that I've had about this business that we call research, and my field of research in it too, and my role, the kinds of roles that I might want to go on to in my career. And so we have these further tips or explanations for you to help get you thinking. Your response should reflect your development as a researcher over the semester. Kind of goes without saying. It should contain reference to a range of RD1 unit material and should also make reference to knowledge you have gained while developing your own research project and establishing your identity as a researcher. Good responses generally develop ideas, themes, or topics that were originally discussed in entries for the Researcher Development Learning Journal, all of which are attached as the appendix and can be referred to within the essay. And what we mean by that is that, so you'll attach, as the appendix is all of your learning journal entries. So attach those to the document. And then in the essay itself, if you feel like you need to, you can say, in my second journal entry, I mentioned X and Y. And since then, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, that kind of strategy is what you can do. But I just want to go back to the question, looking back over the semester, what have you learned about research as a thing that humans do, including how knowledge claims are made, how research fields develop, various factors shape and constrain academic knowledge production. And this is the first major tip. It can feel like, if you just read that question and started kind of bashing out words, it can feel like to you that you need to respond to each of those sub-clauses, that you need to have a response for what you've learned about research as a thing humans do, and a separate response for how knowledge claims are made, a separate response for how fields develop, and a separate response for how various factors shape and constrain academic knowledge production. Colleagues, let me advise you and encourage you to not go down that path. Instead, what you should be thinking about is, as if you were to respond talking, as in if I was to ask you this question right now, how would you respond to it? What have you learned about research as a thing humans do? And just start talking, and you would write that down. Don't think that you need to cover off each of those little sub areas explicitly. What we want you to do is speak to us honestly in the essay about what you've learned. And if that means that you end up not talking about the factors that shape and constrain knowledge production, for example, so be it. The thing that if the theme of what you've learned doesn't include that, that's fine with us. But I'll develop this a little bit more. So let's just go down onto the next page here. There's some instructions in the blue text box there about attaching the appendix. There's some more below. General tips. I'll leave these to you to read yourselves and to think about. We can also talk about them a little bit in office hours. But the main thing I want to touch on here for the purposes of this video is that text in bold in the fourth bullet point. Your task is now to look back on the whole semester and give new thought to what you've learned. Remember, this is the art and the business and the craft of reflection. This is even though many colleagues across many disciplines say to me, we don't do reflection in my field, I think that is false. I think all of us do reflection as part of our work, because all of the time we are trying to stop and think, okay, what did I know before and what do I know now? We're trying to see that vector, see and understand how did we get from the knowledge we had in the past to the knowledge that we have now, and how can I articulate that in writing so that my colleagues can benefit and find value in that trajectory of learning that I've gone on. And another way of saying that is that's what academic writing is. We write about how we learned something about the world so that our colleagues can learn about the world in a similar way. That's what a research paper is. That's what a thesis is. But here we're getting you to reflect on your own learning experience for the purposes of a reflective essay. And so we're wanting you to think about things like, what were your assumptions at the beginning of semester? How did you come into something like week 0, thinking about the world of research, and how were those ideas challenged? And how do you feel about that now? When I say how do you feel, what I mean is, what do you think? What do you think? We're interested in what's going on up here. What do you think about this business, this enterprise that you've begun work in, this role, researcher, that you now inhabit? So look back, cast your mind back, spend a bit of time. That's why we advise in the weekly work plan that you spend a bit of time each week thinking about and reflecting upon and going over your notes and your reflective entries, your learning journal entries, to think about, okay, well, where was I in week 0? What did I think about and what did I do in week 0? Okay, cool. Well, what did I do in week 1? Oh, that's interesting. And you look at the learning journey that you've been on, try and bring some nuggets out of that. What strikes you as interesting? What are you interested in learning more about? What strikes you as problematic? Stuff like that. Okay, let's scroll down a bit. Next page. Again, I'll leave you guys to read about this mostly yourself, but here I just want to touch on these 2 points. The use of RD1 unit material in the essay and the use of independent material. Generally speaking, really good responses to this essay question incorporate both. Remember the name of the unit. The name of the unit really gives you a sense of what we're looking at in this assessment. The unit is called Researcher Development. And this is the essay, this is the assessment that really is interested in your development as a researcher. The annotated bibliography is mechanical. The project development report is about your research project. It's like the output of the work of being a researcher. This essay, assessment A2A, but here particularly A2B, is where we are primarily interested in your professional development. And the context and the constraint that we're working with is that this is a unit of study. And so it has to include some prompts and some themes, some topics that come up in this unit of study. But it should also, because it's about you as a person, as a whole person, about your development as a researcher, it should include, the essay is the it in that sentence, by the way, the essay should include work from that takes place outside of the unit, thinking that takes place outside of the unit, realizations that occur outside of the scope of RD1, whatever that might be. So while what we want you to do is to use themes, topics, events, moments that come up in the course of RD1, in lectures, in week 0, in the videos, in any of the learning material, the readings. Use that as the springboard to think about your own development as a researcher and to write about it. In order to be able to talk about your development of a researcher, you're of course going to have to refer to your own independent work. And that might be work that's done in the elective units that you're doing. And it might be work that you're doing with your supervisor on your project itself, the development of your project, or stuff that you're doing independently with your supervisor. It really is totally up to you, because it's about you as a researcher. We're using the context of RD1 and the topics that we talk about in RD1 to get you thinking about your development as a professional researcher. So there's really no prescribed topic or structure to this essay as such in terms of what you must talk about. You must use something from RD1 to help you explain your learning in RD1 and your development as a researcher. That's the only constraint. There must be something here from RD1. But probably what you'll end up doing is interweaving. Typically that's what really good essays do, is they interweave lessons from RD1 with the realizations that a person has had in their independent work. And independent, again, meaning just outside of RD1. So they might say in week 0, I had this kind of realization about the way that certain parts of the research process are hidden by the academic publishing process. Helene Miale went through, gave the example of Hawking's grad students not appearing as co-authors on the article. And then later on in the semester, one of the things we talked about was how fields develop as kind of groups of people. And in between then, I've been speaking about co-authorship and how research papers develop with my supervisor. And my supervisor had ended up inviting me onto a paper with them, and I'm going to be working on that. But one of the things that became clear is that everyone else I'm working with on that paper had all of this knowledge about the field and the conversations that were going on in the field and the publications that were kind of current. And I realized that what I needed to do was not simply know what was in those articles, but know that they were current and that they were the kinds of things that my colleagues referred to frequently and just kind of by default, in a sense. And then in week 10, we talked about the academic publishing industry itself and how and the way it kind of shapes academic production. So when I think about the kind of issue of authorship and academic publishing in general, I realized that I learned X, Y, Z, whatever. I'm just kind of making up an example here for you. But the point is to kind of bring both, use the RD1 material to start a discussion about something about the world of research that you've learned and that you think is important in terms of your professional development that occurred outside RD1. All right, so I'll leave you guys to read that. Here are the appendix instructions. This whole page basically glosses as attach your learning journal entries to the end of the essay. Here are the assessment criteria. And again, I'm just going to kind of bring my mouse up here and highlight this. The unit is called Researcher Development 1. We're interested in your development as a researcher. Tell us about it. Tell us about it here. Make an essay. An essay is an argument. So you need to make an argument. But let's look at the criteria. Engagement with unit material. So we're starting with the material. Remember, that's the unit material, the stuff that we cover in RD1, can feature as a springboard, the provocation for the start of your essay, the problem that you're going to respond to. And then the response to the question. So you skip back up to page 1 and you think about, well, what did I learn about research? And that's really what we're interested in here. Like, respond to the question. Let's go back up. Let's go back up and see. Looking back over the semester, what have you learned about research as a thing that humans do, including how knowledge claims are made, how research fields develop, and how various factors shape and constrain academic knowledge production? Respond to that question. Tell us a story in response to that question. A story, again, I'm kind of being loose with words. Sorry. Story. Make an argument about your development as a researcher in response to that question. But just unpacking that response to question criteria a little bit here. It's one, an essay structure that is thematic, not simply chronological. This is a mistake that a lot of people make, not just here in RD1, but in plenty of other contexts where you have to write like this, of saying this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then this happened. And because of that, I'm better. And sure, that lays out anecdote and chronology, right? But that's not an argument about something. It's just a list of things that occurred. Instead, what you want to do is pick out themes, pick out topics, salient topics for you about your development as a researcher. Point 2, insightful thematic connections across RD1 unit material and independent material. That's what I was talking about just before. And number 3, evidence of independent research that is connected with content and or themes from the unit. This is a super pro tip that we developed with some students a couple of years ago. And that is that you might talk about you might narrate, you might make an argument for your development, how you've developed intellectually as a researcher as a result of something that came up. Maybe there was maybe you talk about a particular passage in Kuhn that really struck you, and that you developed the essay based on just that kind of couple of sentences that really struck you in Kuhn. And the whole essay is kind of bounces from that. But if you, in the course of that essay, if you don't show that you've engaged with that insight in your own field, by going and looking for similar discussions in your own field or in cognate fields, then that doesn't give us any evidence that you've applied this independently. And one of the great things you can do, and one of the reasons why this is a handy little essay for you, is use this moment of thinking about, okay, well, how do I develop, how does one develop as a person in my field? And the kinds of things that strike you as really interesting in terms of the unit material that we've talked about in RD1, go and look for where people have talked about similar themes in your own field. I can guarantee you will find them. They might not be in academic publications, in journal articles, but you might find them still in academic journals. And I'm thinking particularly of a good example here is the example of reflective writing that's on Views, which is in Cell. That's in an academic journal, but it's not a journal article per se. Science and Nature also have lots of publication like this, where people kind of talk about the work and what it's like to be a person doing the work of a researcher. It's a really vital part of us kind of understanding what it is to be a human being trying to do research, and how can we do it better, and how can we do it well. So go and look for that kind of stuff where it's relevant to the argument that you're trying to make. Show, evidence your kind of interest in research is the thing humans do. Do a bit of research that goes outside of just what we've given you. Next up, written expression. This should immediately bring your mind back to week 0, where we talked about, introduced you to Larry McInerney and the problem of the problem, and Judy Swan talking about emphasis and structure, particularly about structure in writing. And while we're not interested in value in the way that McInerney talks about it for the purposes of this essay, what we are interested in is clear, organised and persuasive text. Clear in the sense of being free of grammatical and syntactic errors. Organised in terms of that Swannian notion of placing emphasis where you want your reader to pay attention, in terms of structuring paragraphs, using subsections if you need to, but it's a very short essay, so you shouldn't need to use very many, if any at all. And persuasive in terms of laying out an argument. This happened, that made me kind of think about this, I discovered this evidence, and therefore I think like this, right? So using logic and reason. And finally, referencing and presentation. well, I guess finally is appendix, but the appendix item is simply that you must include it and that it must be formatted in a particular way. But referencing and presentation refers to this style guide that we have for you. Now, I can't remember if we explained this when we talked about the annotated bibliography style guide, but one of the reasons why we have these really kind of tight requirements for style in RD1 is to get you used to having to conform to an arbitrary style, which is really frequent in the world of research. But also B, kind of really importantly, to help you get familiar with your writing tool. That is, if you use Microsoft Word to edit, make sure that you know how to do things like set titles. That is, not just kind of type some words and then make it bigger or whatever. Set it as a type of text that is the heading type or the title type. Like, really use the tool well. How to change margins and alignment and set footer text and so forth. Oh, and I also can't remember I'll give it away a little bit here. Can't remember what we said before, but all of our example students down here in every MRes core, worksheet that has a style guide like this. Every time there's a student, it's a real person, it's a historical figure, somebody that we admire in some way, and their student number is their birth and death dates, which means we can only refer to dead people, sadly. I suppose we could do something like 2020 to signal they're still alive. But again, make sure you pay attention to all of this. It's a minor detail, but it's the polish, it's the sheen on the essay. It helps your reader see that you care. Okay, so here it is at 6 pages, the worksheet for this assessment. As I said, we can talk about it in office hours. We also have some one-on-one consultations with you coming up in, I think they start taking place in week 11, but we'll get an announcement out to you about that later. So yeah, if you have any questions about it, save it for office hours or save it for the one-on-one consults. Read through this worksheet, but I should say to you, and this is a somewhat more serious note, you are master's students now, and you've been engaged in the work of thinking about the world of research for 8 weeks now, or more. You should need no more than the text in this grey box to do this work, to do the work of writing an essay. That grey box of text is all you should need. That should be the entire prompt that you require to get going. Everything else that's in this document, with the exception of the requirements for word length, percentage, due from, and the style guide, everything else is just kind of gravy, is additional kind of tips to help you get started. All you need to get going is this. And I say, like, you're master's students now because one of the things that characterizes a master's student, that is somebody who's attempting to gain the title of master, is that you can display independent, critical thinking and research exploration. That all you need is a prompt, and away you go and do the work. So, the reason I say this is because it's really, really important for your own mindset as a researcher that you attenuate any kind of desire that you have of seeking instruction from now. As a researcher, one of the things that characterizes the work that you do is independent thinking, independent reading. If you have a question, you answer the question yourself. Now, Jack and I are here to help you if you really do get stuck, but the idea is that at this level, you do the work yourself. All right, so that brings this to a close. I hope you're all well, hope you're doing okay. What is it today? It's the 16th of April today. And this is like more than a month now in lockdown, so I hope you're all staying safe and sane, washing hands frequently, And good luck with this. This is a really enjoyable thing to do to reflect upon your own learning. I hope you have fun with it.